level 4M3. This is one module in procurement, particularly in our CIPS level 4 deployment, procurement and supply, module that teaches us about contracts. So I always say each and every module that you are studying in, level 4, in level 3, in level 3, and level 5, and level 6 going forward, every module, there is a whole reason why you are taught, that module. So I taught this module so that we know about contracts, we know what or how contracts are made, what makes up a contract. So that is something that you are going to learn in today's session. But the information that you are going to learn in this module is very, very broad because of the contracts. They differ. We have like very, very formal contracts. We have, they even define terms of the scope. So I advise that after studying this module, you can even go to the extent of pursuing a certain course either on Coursera or any other or wherever where you can learn more about contracts. So the contracts that we talk about here, most of them are UK based. So the information talks a lot about the UK. So in learning 1.1, learning criterion 1.1, we're going to talk about the documentation that comprise that a commercial agreement can contain for the supply of goods and services. Documentation that a commercial agreement can contain for the supply of goods and services. So our learning criterion 1.1 has about 5 indicative content. We have indicative content 1.1.1, where we are going to talk about invitation to tender or request for quotation. We are going to talk about specifications in our second indicative content 1.1.2. In our third indicative content 1.1.3, we are going to talk about key performance indicators. In 1.1.4, we are going to talk about contract documentation and broad. And in 1.1.5, we are going to talk about pricing and other schedules. So just as an overview, when you are soliciting things in procurement, we can either use an invitation to tender or request for quotation. But the whole reason why we might use maybe an ITT or a request for quotation, it depends on a range of factors that we are going to have a look at. In this module, since we are talking about contracts, when we are dealing with the supplier, you have to have a description of what you want from that supplier. If it's a laptop, you need to describe it down to smallest detail, and we normally do that through specifications. We're also going to talk about key performance indicators to say when we're dealing with suppliers, we need to have measures in place on how we assess that supplier. Right now, if we watch a football match. A football match is, just using a range of things. We start with the goals to say, okay, this team scored more than this one. But if those teams have not scored, the goals with the, a range of things that are used to assess, that match to say, shot on targets, red cards, yellow cards. So that is how you assess, different teams when they are playing in a football pitch. So here we are dealing with contracts where we would be dealing with a supplier, or the supplier would be dealing with the buyer. So we are going to use what we call key performance indicators. And I said key performance indicators, they can just be anything that we deem necessary to incorporate into a contract. We also talked about a contract being a collection of documents. People assume that a contract is just, this agreement where you're going to type using a laptop, that this is the contract or the agreement between this company and this company. But a contract, there is more to a contract than just that. We are supposed to include the key performance indicators, the specifications, the list of supplier staff and other things together with the contract itself, and that would make up a complete contract documentation. We have pricing and other schedules, such as health and safety records, details of supplier staff, use of subcontractors, non-disclosure or confidentiality agreements. And these are some of the items or documents that are attached at the end of the contract for us to say a contract is complete. So just in our introduction, I have used the question-centered approach to this module, like I did for like I did for level 4 M6. Level 4 M6 supply relationships module is one module that I always tell people that is very easy, but how questions are asked in the examination, it is one thing, that is like very, very tricky. So this module also, chapter 3 of this module gives people a hard time. Hence, I saw the need to use the question-centered approach to this module, which is very, very good because of it highlights the content that is very, very, important for people to know. So the question-centered approach, even though I'm using it, the information that is there on my slides, is exactly the same content from the book, just that here I've used questions or the question approach to the module. So the question is, what are some of the requirements of a contract? For us to enter into a contract, what do we need? A contract needs to be clearly defined, contain key terms and conditions, and take into account the legal framework that it sits in. To a degree, it needs to have some flexibility that is allows to be amended to take into account any changes in the business environment or the business relationship. This up-to-date agreed version needs to be easily accessible. So we're saying a contract needs to be clearly defined. When we are drafting a contract, we don't use bombastic words. We just use very simple language, so that the language that is in there is like, easy for both parties to understand. So that is why we need to make sure that, things are like very, very clear. The contract also contains the key terms and conditions. The terms and conditions, they apportion the responsibility between the supplier and the buyer. Because of the contract will state that the supplier is supposed to supply the product or services, while the buying organization is supposed to make payment. The very same amount of payment will be stated in a contract. So the terms and conditions are very, very important. It also takes into account the legal framework that it sits in. Each and every contract, sits on a certain legal framework. That is to say, if we are having a dispute, that contract, it can lead us to go to the courts. So that is why we are saying it should take into account the legal framework that it sits in. Right now, if I'm dealing with a supplier in Botswana, we can choose what we call jurisdiction in our contract. But jurisdiction is like very, very common in when we are dealing with overseas suppliers. Like I'm in Botswana right now. When I'm dealing with a supplier in South Africa, we can choose a jurisdiction. That is where we are going to say in a contract, if ever we are going to have any dispute that might need to be resolved through the courts, which country's courts are we going to use? Are we going to use Botswana courts, or are we going to use a South Africa court? So it's something that we state in jurisdiction. So that is why we are saying a contract takes into account the legal framework that it sits in. To a degree, it needs to have some flexibility. A contract should allow, parties to change it when there is a need for them to. And this one is very common, in construction. You would hardly, give a contractor, some work and then they complete on time. Most of them, most of the suppliers in construction, they always, delay. And then at the end, you might need to increase the duration of the contract. By so increasing the duration of the contract, you are amending the contract itself because of the duration is part of the contract. The contract needs to be understood as a whole agreement or document, and it is a total agreement of all documents. That is to say, all documents, normally the schedules, must be included to be considered as part of the contract. Just like I was saying, a contract is not a single or 2 or 3 page document. A contract can be as big as 200 pages or more than that, because of different attachments or different documents that you are going to attach at the end of that contract. So we normally refer to those documents as schedules. Why? Because of that, just the separate documents, each talking about something different, would have the key performance indicators that are talking about how we are going to measure the supplier and the buyer's performance. Would have the supplier staff. It will be a document containing the names and the credentials of people who are working in the supplying organization. So this is just the introduction of the module to say our contract needs to be clearly defined. It's supposed